Imagine walking into your own five-star hotel and being told you don't belong. Imagine being sprayed with sanitizer like you're contaminated. Imagine watching your employees, people you hired, treat you like trash because of the color of your skin. That's exactly what happened to David Thompson, a black billionaire CEO in the marble lobby of his flagship property. What happened next changed corporate America forever. Stay with me until the end of this story and drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this message travels. The late September sun hung low over Manhattan's skyline, casting long golden shadows across Fifth Avenue as David Thompson stepped out of a yellow cab at precisely 4:47 p.m. He didn't arrive in a limousine. He didn't have an entourage. He carried only a weathered leather backpack slung over one shoulder and wore a simple navy hoodie, jeans, and white sneakers that had seen better days. To anyone watching, he looked like a graduate student, maybe a freelance photographer, or perhaps just another New Yorker navigating the chaos of the city. But David Thompson was none of those things. He was the founder and CEO of Grand View Hotels and Resorts, a 23-property empire spanning 4 continents valued at $2.3 billion. The building before him, the Grand View Grand Hotel, was his crown jewel, his first acquisition, the place where his impossible dream had taken root 15 years ago, when everyone told him a kid from the south side of Chicago had no business in luxury hospitality. Today, he'd come back to see if that dream still lived. David paused on the sidewalk, letting the river of pedestrians flow around him. The hotel rose 37 stories into the autumn sky, all glass and gleaming steel, its Art Deco facade meticulously restored. Through the revolving doors he could see the lobby, that famous lobby with its Italian marble floors, crystal chandeliers imported from Prague, and the original 1929 brass fixtures that had cost him $400,000 to restore. He'd been here 100 times as CEO. Ribbon cuttings, board meetings, New Year's Eve galas, where champagne flowed like water and Manhattan's elite pretended to like each other. But he'd never been here like this. Anonymous, unremarkable, black. "Let's see what we've become," he whispered to himself and walked through the doors. The lobby enveloped him in cool, conditioned air, and the subtle scent of white tea and fig, a custom fragrance he'd commissioned from a perfumer in Grasse. His footsteps echoed on marble as he crossed toward the front desk, passing beneath chandeliers that caught the dying sunlight and scattered it into 1,000 golden fragments. The lobby was moderately busy for a Thursday evening. A family with 3 children clustered near the concierge desk, the kids sticky-fingered from ice cream. A couple in tennis whites laughed by the elevator bank. 2 businessmen in sharp suits talked merger terms over coffee in the lounge area. And then there was David. Nobody looked at him. Or rather, nobody looked at him. They looked around him the way New Yorkers perfected that urban skill of seeing everything and acknowledging nothing. Except one person. Rebecca Miller stood behind the front desk like a general surveying her domain. She was 43, blonde hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. Her Grand View uniform, immaculate navy blazer, cream blouse, a gold name tag that caught the light. She'd been with the company for 6 years, worked her way up from night auditor to front office manager, and she ran the desk with military precision. She saw David approaching, and her eyes, sharp, analytical, already judging, tracked him from revolving door to marble floor. David could feel her gaze like a physical weight. He'd felt it 1,000 times before in his life. That look, that calculation, that instantaneous assessment that happened in the microsecond between sight and thought. He kept his expression neutral, his stride even, and arrived at the desk with a polite smile. "Good evening," he said. His voice was warm, cultured, carrying just a trace of his Chicago roots. "I have a reservation under Thompson." Rebecca didn't smile back. She didn't reach for her keyboard. She stood absolutely still for 3 full seconds, a tiny eternity, and David watched her face journey through a series of micro-expressions. Surprise, confusion, suspicion, and finally something harder to name, but impossible to miss. Disdain. "I'm sorry," Rebecca said, though her tone carried no apology whatsoever. "Did you say you have a reservation?" The emphasis on the last word was subtle but unmistakable. David had heard that emphasis before. In college, when he'd walked into a seminar on international business. In banks, when he'd sought his first business loan. In boardrooms before anyone knew his name. "Yes," David said simply. "Thompson. David Thompson. I booked directly through your website 3 days ago. Confirmation number." "Sir." Rebecca held up one manicured hand. "Let me stop you right there. Are you absolutely certain you booked at this hotel?" A young couple approached the desk beside David White, well-dressed, pulling designer luggage. Rebecca's face transformed instantly into warm professionalism. "Welcome to the Grand View Grand. I'll be right with you folks," she said brightly, then turned back to David. Her smile evaporated. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step aside while I help our actual guests." The words hung in the air like a slap. "I am an actual guest," David said quietly. His heart rate hadn't changed, his expression remained calm, but something cold had settled in his chest. Not anger, not yet, but a deep, weary familiarity with this particular brand of cruelty. "I have a reservation, if you'll just check your system." "Sir, I don't need to check anything." Rebecca's voice had taken on an edge now loud enough that heads began to turn in the lobby. "We're a 5-star establishment. Our rooms start at $800 a night. I think perhaps you're looking for something more budget-friendly. There's a Motel 6 about 15 blocks from here, or I could recommend several hostels in Brooklyn." "I'm not looking for a hostel," David said. His voice remained level, but now people were definitely watching. The businessman had paused mid-sentence. The couple with luggage exchanged glances. "I have a reservation at this hotel. Thompson. Thomp. "Oh, I know how to spell Thompson," Rebecca said, and there it was, that particular tone that people used when they wanted to make something sound less legitimate. "It's a very common name, isn't it? But I'm looking at our system right now, and I don't see any reservation under that name." She wasn't looking at her system. Her hands hadn't touched her keyboard once. "Perhaps you could actually check?" David suggested. Rebecca's jaw tightened. She glanced over David's shoulder and raised her hand in a small gesture. "Janet, could you come here, please?" A woman in her mid-30s materialized beside Rebecca. Janet Park, the assistant front office manager. Korean-American, usually friendly with a competence that David had noted in her performance reviews. Those reviews. He'd read every single one for every employee at every property. He knew Janet had a 6-year-old son. He knew she'd been Employee of the Month twice. He knew she volunteered at a homeless shelter on weekends. He wondered if she remembered any of that right now. "Yes, Rebecca," Janet said. "This gentleman claims he has a reservation," Rebecca said. And again, that word "claims" did all the work. "Could you help him understand that we require a credit card and valid ID for all reservations, and that our rooms are priced for luxury accommodations?" Janet looked at David. He watched her face carefully, still hoping after all these years, that she would see something different. See him. "Sir." Janet said, her voice softer than Rebecca's, but no less final. "Did you perhaps book through a third-party site? Sometimes those bookings don't transfer correctly to our system. Or maybe you have the wrong hotel. The Grand View City Center is about 30 blocks north." "I booked here," David said. "This hotel, 3 days ago. I have the confirmation email on my phone if you'd like to see it." "That won't be necessary," Rebecca interjected quickly. "Sir, I'm going to be frank with you. You're making our guests uncomfortable." David blinked. "I'm making them uncomfortable?" "Yes." Rebecca reached beneath the counter and produced a bottle of hand sanitizer. She pumped it 3 times into her palm, then rubbed her hands together with exaggerated thoroughness, her eyes never leaving David's face. The message was unmistakable. "You're dirty. You're contamination. You don't belong here." The businessman's wife had her phone out now, holding it low but clearly recording. An older couple in the seating area had stopped reading their newspapers. A bellhop stood frozen by the luggage cart. And David felt it happening, that terrible familiar narrowing of the world, where you become a spectacle, where your humanity shrinks down to this single moment, this single interaction, and hundreds of years of history pressed down on your shoulders like a physical weight. "I'm clean," David said, and hated how defensive those words sounded. "I just want to check into my room." "Sir, we've been very patient," Rebecca said. She pumped more sanitizer, the sharp smell of alcohol filling the air between them. "But you clearly don't have a reservation here. Now you can either leave voluntarily or I can call security. What's it going to be?" David stood very still. In his backpack was his wallet containing 6 credit cards with credit limits that exceeded the hotel's monthly revenue. In his pocket was a phone with the direct numbers of 3 board members, the company's COO, and the Grandview corporate attorney. In his mind was the complete architectural blueprint of this building, the quarterly earnings reports, the employee satisfaction scores, and the name of every single person who worked here. But in this moment, in this lobby under these lights, he was just a black man being told he didn't belong. "I'd like to speak to your general manager," David said. Rebecca actually laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Mr. Howard doesn't waste his time with situations like this. Janet, call security. Tell Steve we have a vagrant refusing to leave the premises." "I'm not a vagrant," David said. "I'm a paying guest with a confirmed reservation." "You're a liar," Rebecca said flatly, and the word cracked across the lobby like a whip. Several gasps. The woman with the phone stepped closer, definitely recording now. A teenager near the elevator pulled out his phone too. Then another guest. Then another. David could see them, a constellation of raised devices all pointed at him. In another life, his CEO life, he would have been concerned about optics, about the brand, about damage control. But right now he was grateful. Because whatever happened next, the world would see it. "You need to leave," Rebecca continued. Her voice had risen now, carrying across the marble and chrome. "You don't belong here. You can't afford to be here. And I will not have you harassing our actual guests or disrupting our lobby." "I haven't harassed anyone," David said. "I walked in. I asked to check in. That's all." "You're loitering," Janet added, though she looked less certain now, her eyes darting to the phones, to the watching faces. "I'm checking in." "You're trespassing," Rebecca snapped. "And if you don't leave right now, I'm having you arrested. For trying to check into my reservation. For being somewhere you don't belong." The words echoed. Someone in the lobby actually gasped. The businessman's wife said, "Oh my God," loudly enough for everyone to hear. And Rebecca, hearing her own words hang in the air, realizing perhaps that she'd said the quiet part loud, tried to backtrack. I mean because you don't have a reservation," she stammered. "That's what I meant. You don't have a booking here, so you don't belong in our lobby." But the damage was done. The cat was out of his bag. The truth was in the open. David saw it in her eyes. She knew what she'd revealed. Janet knew it too. She'd taken a small step back, distancing herself. The phones kept recording. The lobby had gone almost silent, the usual ambient noise of a luxury hotel replaced by the thick electric tension of a moment that everyone present would remember. From somewhere near the elevators, a voicemail, authoritative, annoyed, called out, "What's going on here?" "Steve Wilson." Chief of Security came striding across the lobby like a man who'd done this 100 times. He was 51, ex-NYPD, with a Marine Corps tattoo barely visible under his left sleeve, and a permanent expression that suggested he was 3 seconds away from a confrontation at all times. David had hired him 4 years ago. Excellent credentials, 23 years on the force, commendations, references that praised his professionalism. But David had never met him like this, as a problem to be solved, as something to be removed. "Steve, thank God," Rebecca said, relief flooding her voice. "This man is refusing to leave. He's harassing guests, claiming he has a reservation when he clearly doesn't, and he won't take no for an answer." Steve looked David up and down. David watched the assessment happen: the hoodie, the backpack, the sneakers, the skin. "Sir?" Steve said, his voice carrying that particular cop cadence. "I'm going to need you to come with me." "I have a reservation," David said. He was tired now, bone tired, soul tired. The kind of tired that came from fighting the same battle over and over, from proving his humanity again and again, from standing in lobbies and boardrooms and restaurants and airports and explaining that yes, he belonged, yes, he was legitimate, yes, he was real. "Sir, don't make this difficult," Steve said. His hand moved to his hip, not quite touching anything, but making the gesture clear. "You can walk out with me right now, or I can call NYPD, and you can leave in handcuffs. Your choice." "I'd like to make a phone call," David said. Rebecca scoffed. "To who? Your lawyer, sir. You're in a 5-star hotel in Manhattan making false claims. Do you have any idea how much trouble you're in?" "Actually," David said quietly, pulling his phone from his pocket, "I have a pretty good idea." Steve's hand moved closer to his belt. "Sir, put the phone away." "I'm making one call," David said. "Just one. Then if you still want to throw me out, we can discuss it." "There's nothing to discuss," Rebecca said. "You're leaving, now." But David was already dialing. The lobby watched. 30, maybe 40 people, now all focused on this one moment. The phones kept recording. Somewhere in the crowd, someone was probably streaming this live. David thought about that thought, about how many people were watching in real time as a black man stood in a luxury hotel lobby and fought for the simple right to be believed. The phone rang once, twice. "David?" The voice on the other end was confused. Michael Chen, the company's chief operating officer, had probably been expecting a normal Thursday evening. "Is everything okay?" "Michael." David said, his voice carrying across the silent lobby. "This is David Thompson. I'm standing in the lobby of our flagship property, the Grand View Grand Hotel, and I'm being removed for trespassing." A pause. A long pause. David could almost hear the gears turning. "You're... what?" "I'd like you to come down here," David said calmly. "Now please." "I'm 15 minutes away." "David, what?" "Just come, and bring my business card." David ended the call. He looked at Steve, then at Rebecca, then at Janet. He looked at all the phones, all the watching faces, all the people who would tell this story later at dinner parties and family gatherings. "I've made my call," he said. "I'll wait right here." Rebecca's face had gone pale. "You're not waiting anywhere. Steve, remove him. Now." But something in Steve's expression had shifted. Something in the phone call, in David's calm, in the way he'd said, "our flagship property," something had registered. "Sir," Steve said slowly, "who exactly did you just call?" "The chief operating officer of Grand View Hotels and Resorts," David said. "He'll be here in about 14 minutes. The lobby was a tomb. You could hear the air conditioning, the distant ding of elevator bells, someone's phone buzzing with incoming notifications. Rebecca's laugh was shrill now, desperate. "Oh, this is rich. You expect us to believe that you know the COO of this company, that you have his personal number." "I do," David said simply. "Prove it," Janet said. "Show us your phone. Show us the call log." David considered this. He could show them. He could pull up the contact Michael Chen Koo and watch their faces change. He could reveal his entire phone, his entire life, his entire identity right here and now. But something in him resisted. Some deep, stubborn part that was tired of proving himself, tired of jumping through hoops, tired of making his existence acceptable to people who should have simply treated him with basic human dignity from the start. "No," he said. "Because you're lying," Rebecca said triumphantly. "Steve, get him out of here. I don't care what story he's spinning." "I'll wait for Michael," David interrupted. "Right here. You can stand with me if you want, or you can go back to work. But I'm not leaving." Steve looked uncertain now. His hand had moved away from his belt. He glanced at Rebecca, at the phones, at the growing crowd. "Sir," he said carefully, "let's just step outside for a minute. We can wait for your friend out there." "I'll wait here," David repeated, "in the lobby of my hotel." "Your hotel?" Rebecca's voice cracked. "Oh my God, now you're claiming you own this place. This is insane. This is actually insane. Steve, I want him arrested for trespassing, for harassment, for—" "Rebecca." Steve's voice was firm now. "Let's just wait. 15 minutes. "We are not waiting," Rebecca snapped. "I am the front office manager, and I am telling you to remove this man from—" The revolving doors spun. A man in an expensive charcoal suit burst into the lobby, moving fast, his face flushed. Michael Chen was 42, Taiwanese-American, brilliant with numbers, and usually unflappable. But right now, he looked like a man who'd just sprinted 6 blocks, which he had. His eyes scanned the lobby, found David standing there surrounded by security and front desk staff and 40 watching guests, and Michael's face went through a remarkable journey of expressions: relief, confusion, understanding, horror. "David," Michael said, crossing the marble floor in long strides. "Are you what happened? Are you okay?" David gestured at Rebecca, at Janet, at Steve. "I tried to check in. It didn't go well." Michael looked at them, really looked at them. And David watched as his COO, a man he'd worked alongside for 8 years, who'd been at his daughter's wedding, who knew every financial detail of this company, put the pieces together. "You didn't." Michael's voice trailed off. "They didn't." "I'd like to speak to the general manager," David said quietly. "Is Richard here?" "He's in his office. I called him on the way. He's coming down." Michael turned to Rebecca. "Who are you?" "Rebecca Miller, front office manager." She said, her voice not quite steady. "Sir, I don't know who you are, but this man was attempting to—" "Do you know who that man is?" Michael interrupted, pointing at David. Rebecca's face had lost all color. He said his name was Thompson." "His name is Thompson," Michael said. "David Thompson, the founder and CEO of Grandview Hotels and Resorts. The owner of this building. Your boss's boss's boss. The man who signs every single paycheck in this company, including yours." The silence that followed was absolute. Someone in the crowd whispered, "Holy shit." A phone clattered to the marble floor. Rebecca's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Steve actually took a step back, his face ashen. Janet made a small sound that might have been a sob. And David just stood there, backpack still on his shoulder, watching his employees realize what they'd done. Rebecca tried to speak. Failed. Tried again. We didn't know." "That's the problem, isn't it?" David said softly. "You didn't know. You didn't ask. You just decided." The elevator chimed. Richard Howard, the general manager, 58, white-haired with 30 years in luxury hospitality, emerged and froze when he saw the scene. "David?" His voice was strangled. "Oh my God, David, what—" "Hello, Richard," David said. "We need to talk." "Sir, I don't understand. Why are you—" Richard looked at Rebecca, at the crowd, at the phones still recording. Understanding dawned on his face. "Oh no. Oh Jesus Christ, no. Your staff assumed I couldn't afford to be here," David said, his voice carrying across the silent lobby. Every word measured. Every word true. "They questioned my reservation. They told me to go to a motel. They called me a liar. They threatened to have me arrested. And then your front office manager sprayed sanitizer in front of my face to make it clear how contaminated she thought I was." Richard swayed slightly, his hand reaching for the concierge desk to steady himself. "But you want to know the really interesting part," David continued. "Not one person asked for my ID. Not one person actually checked the system. Not one person treated me like a human being who might be telling the truth. They just looked at me, saw my skin, and decided I didn't belong. The lobby was utterly silent now. 40 people, maybe 50, all witnessing this moment. The phones captured every second. David turned to face the crowd. He looked at all those faces, shocked, sympathetic, embarrassed, vindicated. And he thought about how many of them had their own stories. How many had stood in lobbies or boardrooms or classrooms and been told in 1,000 subtle ways that they didn't belong. "I'm going to ask you all a question," David said, his voice quiet but resonant. "And I want you to think carefully before you answer. Look at me, right now. Really look at me. And ask yourself, what did you see when I walked through those doors?" No one answered, but David could see it in their eyes. He could see the assumptions, the biases, the automatic categorizations that happened in the space between sight and thought. "That's what I thought," he said softly. He turned to Rebecca. She was crying now, silent tears tracking down her face, her mascara starting to run. "You asked me to leave," David said. "You told me I didn't belong here. So let me tell you something. This lobby, I designed it. Every fixture, every piece of furniture, every paint color. I spent 14 months restoring this building. I personally interviewed over 300 candidates to staff this hotel. I wrote the mission statement that's probably hanging in your break room. Excellence has no color. Hospitality knows no boundaries. Dignity is not negotiable." Rebecca's tears came faster. "But apparently," David continued, "those are just words. Because when it actually mattered, when someone walked through those doors who didn't look like your idea of a luxury guest, you forgot every single principle this company was built on." He turned to Michael. "Clear the office suite on the executive floor. I'm going to be here for a while. We have work to do." Then David Thompson, CEO, walked past his front office manager, past his security chief, past his assistant manager, and toward the elevator. The crowd parted like water. Just before stepping into the elevator, he turned back one more time. "And someone," he said quietly, "please cancel my reservation. I won't be needing a room after all. I'll be living here." The elevator doors closed on 40 stunned faces and a lobby that would never be the same. The elevator rose in silence, carrying David and Michael Chen away from the chaos below. Michael hadn't spoken yet. His hands were shaking slightly, fingers pressed against his temples, as if trying to ward off a migraine that had already arrived. When the doors opened on the executive floor, a private level that most guests never knew existed, Michael finally found his voice. "How long?" he asked. "How long were you down there?" David stepped into the hallway, its walls lined with original photographs of the hotel from 1929. 23 minutes. Jesus Christ. Michael followed him, his expensive shoes silent on the carpeted floor. "David, I don't even know what to say. I don't know how to—" "Don't apologize for them," David interrupted quietly. He stopped at the door to the executive suite, the one with his name on a brass plate. He hadn't been here in 3 months. "Don't excuse it. Don't explain it away. What happened down there is exactly what I needed to see." "What you needed?" Michael's voice cracked. "David, they treated you like I was invisible. Like I was criminal. Like I was nothing." David unlocked the door. "And you know what the worst part is? They probably don't even think they're racist. Rebecca probably goes home and tells her friends she doesn't see color. Steve probably has a Black Lives Matter sign in his window. But when it counted, when I was standing right in front of them, they saw only one thing." The executive suite was exactly as he'd left it. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Fifth Avenue. A desk made from reclaimed wood from the original hotel. Photographs of his grandmother, who'd cleaned hotel rooms for 40 years and never stayed in one as a guest. Michael closed the door behind them. "What are you going to do?" David set his backpack down. From outside he could hear sirens. The city's eternal soundtrack. "I'm going to fix it." Fix what? The hotel, the staff. You can't just... The system, David said. The whole thing. Every property, every employee, every single assumption that lets something like this happen. He turned to face his COO. But first, I need you to get me every piece of data we have on discrimination complaints. Every guest survey that mentioned staff treatment. Every employee who reported bias. I want it all, Michael. Going back 5 years. Michael pulled out his phone, already typing. I'll have it by morning. I need it in 2 hours. David, it's almost 6 p.m. The team... Then wake them up, David said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that Michael had only heard a few times before. This is a crisis, Michael. We just found out that our flagship hotel, My Hotel, treats black guests like criminals. And if it's happening here, it's happening everywhere. Michael's fingers froze over his phone. You think this is systemic? I know it is. David moved to the window. Below, he could see the lobby entrance. A crowd had gathered on the sidewalk. He could see phones, out people talking animatedly. The story was spreading. I've felt it every time I visited our properties unannounced. The way staff look at me before they know who I am. The extra questions, the subtle hesitations. I just told myself it was paranoia, that I was being oversensitive, that I'd built something better than that. You did build something better. Did I? David's reflection stared back at him from the darkening glass. Or did I just build something expensive? Because luxury doesn't mean equality. Michael, it just means the discrimination comes with better lighting. A knock at the door interrupted them. Richard Howard stood in the hallway, his face gray sweat beading on his upper lip despite the air conditioning. David, he said, may I come in? David gestured to a chair. Richard entered like a man approaching a gallows, lowering himself carefully into the seat across from David's desk. I've suspended Rebecca and Steve pending a full investigation, Richard said without preamble. Janet's been placed on probation. I've called an emergency staff meeting for 7 a.m. tomorrow, and I've drafted a statement for the press. Show me the statement, David said. Richard pulled out his tablet, hands trembling slightly as he pulled up the document. David read it in silence. It was everything he expected, professional, apologetic, carefully worded to minimize legal liability while expressing appropriate remorse. It was also completely inadequate. No, David said, handing the tablet back. No? Richard's voice pitched higher. David, we need to get ahead of this. The video is everywhere. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. There's already a hashtag #GrandViewGate. We need to control the narrative before what? David leaned back in his chair. Before people find out that a black man was discriminated against in a luxury hotel, Richard, that's not a narrative to control. That's just Tuesday in America. But we can't let this define us. We need to show that this was an isolated incident, that we're taking immediate action, that we don't tolerate. Except we do tolerate it, David interrupted. We have tolerated it for years. The only difference is that this time it happened to me and it got caught on camera. He stood up, began pacing. Michael, while you're pulling those discrimination complaints, I also want every security incident report for the past 2 years. Every time someone was asked to leave a lobby. Every time a guest was questioned about their reservation. I want to see the pattern. You think there's a pattern? Richard asked quietly. David stopped pacing. He looked at his general manager, a man he'd promoted 3 years ago, a man whose kids sent him Christmas cards, a man who'd cried at David's father's funeral. Richard, David said gently, have you ever been asked to show your ID in the lobby of one of our hotels? Richard opened his mouth, closed it. No. Have you ever had a staff member question whether you could afford to stay with us? No. Have you ever been told to try a cheaper hotel? No. Then yes, David said. There's a pattern. You just haven't been able to see it. Richard's face crumpled. I should have seen it. That's my job. I should have. You should have. David agreed, and the words were kind but firm. But you didn't. So now we're going to make it impossible to miss. His phone buzzed, then buzzed again, and again. David glanced at the screen. Texts from board members, from investors, from friends, and from one number he didn't recognize. The unknown number had sent a video link. David clicked it. The video was from earlier, but not from the angle he'd expected. This wasn't from the lobby. This was from before, from the sidewalk. Someone had started recording the moment David had stepped out of the cab. The video showed him standing on the sidewalk looking up at the building. Just a man in a hoodie carrying a backpack. The comments below were already pouring in. Why is this even news? He looks sus tbh. Not all heroes wear capes, but all suspicious people wear hoodies apparently. This is literally just a guy existing. Imagine getting kicked out for breathing while black. David scrolled through hundreds of comments. Thousands. The video already had 800,000 views, and it had been posted less than an hour ago. How many videos are there? He asked. Michael checked his own phone. At least a dozen separate recordings from the lobby, plus this sidewalk one, plus, oh God. What? Someone was live streaming. Michael said, his face pale. On TikTok, the whole thing. From when you first approached the desk until you got in the elevator. They had 8,000 viewers watching in real time. David felt something shift in his chest. Not anger. Not quite. Something colder. More crystalline. He'd been watched, not by dozens of people in a lobby, but by thousands of strangers across the world. They'd witnessed his humiliation in real time. They'd seen him called a liar, a vagrant, a criminal. They'd seen him be black in a space that didn't want him. Find that live stream, David said. I want to watch it. David, I don't think that's a good... Find it. Michael hesitated, then pulled up TikTok on his tablet. The video was easy to find. It was trending. The account belonged to @Jessica Wright's profile picture showing a young white woman with blue hair and glasses. Her bio read, writer, observer, truth teller. The video was titled, Rich Hotel Kicks Out Black Guest Watch Till the End. It had 3.2 million views. David took the tablet. He sat down, and he watched himself be destroyed. The video started with the camera low-positioned, as if Jessica had been sitting in the lobby lounge area. The angle showed David approaching the front desk, showed Rebecca's immediate body language change. But what the lobby perspective had hidden the live stream captured perfectly Rebecca's face. The micro-expressions. The instant judgment. And the comments. Oh God, the comments had been rolling in live as it happened. Here we go. I bet they kick him out. $50 says security gets called. This is gonna be bad. Reminder that this is 2025 and this still happens. David watched himself speak to Rebecca. He couldn't hear his own words. The audio was muffled by distance, but he could hear Rebecca's responses perfectly. Jessica must have been close enough to catch every word. Are you absolutely certain you booked at this hotel? The live stream comments exploded. There's the racism. Did she really just say that? Her tone, though? I can't believe this. Yes, you can, you just don't want to. David watched the couple approach the desk. Watched Rebecca's face transform for them. Watched his own expression remain calm, neutral, dignified. Staying composed respect. How is he so calm? Because he's had to do this 1,000 times before. This is exhausting just to watch. Then came the moment with the sanitizer. On camera, with distance and angle, making it clear it looked exactly like what it was, a deliberate insult. Rebecca pumping the sanitizer, rubbing her hands, staring at David. The comments went nuclear. No, she didn't. What the fuck? I'm actually gonna be sick. This is 2025. This is 2025. This is 2025. Call the manager. Call the owner. Sue them. David's hands were steady on the tablet, but his heart was hammering. Watching it from this angle, seeing it as thousands of strangers had seen it, made it somehow worse. More real. More undeniable. He watched himself stand there, maintaining dignity, while being publicly humiliated. He watched Rebecca call Janet over, watched Steve approach, watched the phones come out, and he watched the moment when he'd made his call to Michael. On the video, you couldn't hear his words clearly, but the comments suggested that Jessica, and by extension, her thousands of viewers, had caught enough. Did he just say, "Our flagship property"? Wait. Oh shit. Oh shit. Is he the owner? No fucking way. Plot twist. The video continued through Michael's arrival, through the revelation, through the moment when Rebecca realized what she'd done. And then it ended with David's final statement before entering the elevator. The comments on the video had continued long after the live stream ended. David scrolled through them, now reading what the world thought. "I work in luxury hospitality, and this makes me sick. We're better than this. We have to be better than this. My dad is a black businessman, and I've watched this happen to him so many times, I've lost count. Thank you for recording this." To everyone saying, well, how were they supposed to know he was the owner? That's the whole point. They should have treated him with respect, regardless. White woman here. I've never been questioned in a hotel lobby in my entire life, not once. Think about that. I'm never staying at a Grandview hotel again until they fix this systemically. I'm crying watching this, the dignity, the composure, the patience, while being treated like a criminal in his own building. David handed the tablet back to Michael. "Everyone saw it," he said quietly. "The whole world," Michael confirmed. "Good." David stood up, moved back to the window. The crowd on the sidewalk had grown. Because now they can't pretend it doesn't happen. They can't say I'm being oversensitive, or playing the race card, or imagining things. 8,000 people watched it live. Millions have watched it since. They saw exactly what I experience, what we all experience. Richard had been silent through the video. Now he spoke, his voice hoarse. "David, I am so deeply sorry. I hired Rebecca. I trained her. I told her she was doing excellent work. This is my failure. Mine." "It's not just yours," David said. "It's all of ours, mine included. I built a company and thought that excellence and luxury would somehow protect us from bias. But you can't buy your way out of racism, Richard. You can't polish it away with marble floors and crystal chandeliers." His phone rang. The board chair. David declined the call. It rang again. A major investor. Declined. Again. His sister. He answered. "Marcus just sent me the video," she said without preamble. His sister, Dr. Carol Thompson, a surgeon in Chicago who'd dealt with her own share of discrimination in operating rooms where people assumed she was a nurse. "David, are you okay?" "I'm fine." "Don't lie to me. I watched that woman spray sanitizer at you. I watched that security guard treat you like a threat. Are you okay?" David closed his eyes. "No." "What do you need?" "I don't know yet," he admitted. "But I know what I'm going to do. Which is change everything." He could hear Carol's breath catch. "The whole company, the whole industry if I have to." "David, I have to go, Carol. I love you." "Love you too. And David, I'm proud of you. For staying. For being calm. For not letting them make you into what they expected." After he hung up, David stood in silence for a long moment. Through the window he could see the city lights beginning to sparkle as evening deepened into night. Manhattan in all its gleaming glory. A city built by immigrants and outsiders, now one of the most expensive places on earth. A city where you could be a billionaire and still be told you didn't belong. "Michael," he said finally, "set up a video conference for 9 p.m. Every general manager, every regional director, every department head. I don't care if they're on vacation. I don't care if they're asleep. Get them on the call." "What are you going to tell them?" David turned from the window. His face was calm, but his eyes held something that Michael had never seen before. Not anger. Not rage. Something more powerful. Purpose. I'm going to tell them that everything changes. Starting tonight. No more diversity committees that meet twice a year and do nothing. No more unconscious bias training that everyone sits through while checking their email. No more policies that exist on paper and nowhere else. David, you're talking about overhauling the entire company. I'm talking about saving it, David corrected. Because if we don't fix this, if we don't become the change the hospitality industry desperately needs, then we deserve to fail. Richard stood up shakily. What do you want from me? I want you to go back to the lobby, David said. I want you to talk to every staff member who was working today. I want you to ask them what they saw, what they heard, what they thought, and I want you to ask them what they would have done differently. And if they say they wouldn't have done anything differently, then we have a lot more work to do than I thought. After Richard left, David and Michael spent the next 2 hours preparing. They pulled data. They reviewed policies. They drafted plans that would have seemed impossible that morning, but now felt absolutely necessary. At 8:45 p.m., David went down to the lobby. He took the stairs instead of the elevator, descending 37 floors in silence, his footsteps echoing in the concrete stairwell. It gave him time to think, time to breathe, time to prepare for what came next. When he emerged into the lobby, the evening shift was on duty. Different faces, different staff. But David wondered how many of them had heard what happened. How many had watched the videos? How many were nervous that the CEO was somewhere in the building? The lobby looked the same as always. Beautiful, pristine, expensive. But David saw it differently now. He saw the way the concierge's eyes tracked a young black couple checking in. He saw the subtle double-take when a Latino man in casual clothes asked for directions. He saw the unconscious patterns, the automatic assessments, the invisible machinery of bias at work. He was standing near the brass mailbox, an original 1929 fixture, when he heard a voice behind him. "Excuse me, are you lost?" David turned. A young bellhop, maybe 22, white, with earnest eyes and a name tag that read Kevin. "No," David said. "Just looking." Kevin glanced at David's hoodie, his backpack. "Sir, guests aren't really allowed in this area. The elevators are over there." "I'm aware," David said. "Are you checking in? I can show you to the front desk." "That's all right." Kevin shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to move along. We've had some issues today with unauthorized people in the lobby and—" "What kind of issues?" David asked. I'm not supposed to talk about it. But please, sir, just go to the front desk, or I'll have to call a manager." David studied the young man's face. He saw nervousness, but not malice. He saw someone following instructions, doing what he'd been trained to do. Protect the space. Guard the threshold. Keep out people who don't belong. "Kevin," David said gently, "have you seen the videos from today?" The bellhop's face flushed. "Yes, sir. Everyone has." "And what did you think?" "I think—" Kevin swallowed hard. "I think it was really messed up. I think that man should have been treated better. I think—" He trailed off, seeming to realize he was talking to a stranger about company business. "You think what?" David prompted. "I think maybe we need to change some things," Kevin finished quietly. David smiled. It was the first genuine smile he'd felt all day. "I think you're absolutely right. What's your last name, Kevin?" "Morrison, sir." "Well, Kevin Morrison, I'm David Thompson, and I think you're going to do just fine here." He extended his hand. Kevin stared at it, then at David's face, and his eyes went wide. "Oh my God," Kevin whispered. You're... "I'm the man who thinks you're exactly the kind of employee this company needs," David said. "Someone who sees a problem and thinks we should fix it." Kevin shook his hand, still looking stunned. "Sir, I didn't mean to—" "You did your job," David said. "You saw someone you thought didn't belong, and you addressed it politely. That's good. But here's what I want you to remember. Everyone who walks through those doors belongs until they prove otherwise. Everyone deserves respect until they earn disrespect, not the other way around. Can you remember that? Yes, sir, Kevin said. Absolutely. David nodded and headed back toward the stairs. Behind him, he heard Kevin on his radio. Guys, the CEO is in the building, like walking around. I just talked to him. Oh my God. I just talked to him. At 9 p.m. Exactly. David sat in the executive suite with his laptop looking at a screen divided into 46 video windows. 46 general managers. 46 faces showing various degrees of concern, confusion, and dread. Good evening, David said. Thank you all for joining on short notice. I assume you've all seen the videos from our Manhattan flagship today. Heads nodded, murmurs of assent. Then you know that we have a problem, David continued. Not just at the Grandview Grand, not just in Manhattan. We have a systemic problem across our entire organization, and we're going to fix it. Tonight we start. Tomorrow we accelerate. And we will not stop until every single hotel in this company is a place where everyone, and I mean everyone, is treated with dignity and respect, regardless of what they look like. He paused, looking at each face on the screen. Some of you are going to resist this. You're going to say your property doesn't have these issues. You're going to say your staff would never do what Rebecca and Steve and Janet did today. And you might be right. But you also might be wrong, because bias doesn't announce itself. It doesn't wear a sign. It lives in assumptions and microaggressions and 1,000 tiny moments that add up to making people feel like they don't belong. David, one of the regional directors, spoke up. Patricia Chen from the West Coast Properties. What exactly are you proposing? I'm not proposing anything, David said. I'm telling you what's going to happen. Starting Monday, every property will begin mandatory anti-bias training. Real training, not a checkbox exercise. We're bringing in consultants who actually know what they're doing. Every employee from housekeeping to executive level. Everyone. He pulled up a document on screen share. Second, we're implementing an anonymous reporting system where guests and staff can report discriminatory treatment. Every report will be investigated. Every report will be documented, and patterns will result in immediate action. More faces on the screen, some nodding, some looking uncomfortable. Third, we're auditing our security incident reports. Every time someone was asked to leave a property, every time a reservation was questioned, we're looking for patterns, and where we find them, we're fixing them. David, this is going to be expensive, someone said. David recognized him. Thomas Wright, general manager in Dallas. You know what's more expensive, David replied. Lawsuits, boycotts, a destroyed reputation. But more than that, Thomas, you know what's more expensive than fixing this problem, being the problem. Being the kind of company that makes people feel unwelcome because of the color of their skin. That cost is incalculable. The screen was silent. I know this is hard, David said, his voice softer now. I know it's uncomfortable to examine our biases, to admit that we might be part of the problem. But today, I stood in my own lobby and was treated like a criminal. And if it can happen to me, the CEO, the owner, then it's happening to other guests every single day. Guests who don't have the luxury of revealing themselves as the boss. Guests who just swallow the humiliation and never come back. That ends now. He looked directly into the camera. This company was built on a promise: excellence has no color. Hospitality knows no boundaries. Dignity is not negotiable. For too long, those were just words. Pretty words on a wall. Starting tomorrow, they become our reality. And anyone who can't live up to that standard doesn't belong at Grandview. Not as a manager, not as a bellhop, not as anyone. The video conference continued for another hour. Questions, concerns, logistics. But David could see it in their faces, the shift, the understanding that something fundamental had changed, that this wasn't a PR crisis to be managed. This was a moment of transformation. When the call ended, David sat in the dark office, the only light coming from the glow of Manhattan outside his window. His phone showed 47 missed calls, 238 text messages, and hundreds of notifications. But there was one message that made him pause. From the live streamer, Jessica. "Mr. Thompson, I'm the one who recorded you today. I'm so sorry you went through that. But I want you to know, 8,000 people watched live. They saw everything, and every single one of them was on your side. Every single one wanted justice. Sometimes the world needs to see the truth to believe it. Thank you for not walking away. Thank you for fighting. We're all watching to see what happens next." David typed a reply. "Thank you for bearing witness. That's how change begins, with people who refuse to look away." He hit send and stood up. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, more conversations, more work. But tonight, in the quiet of his office, David allowed himself a moment to feel what he'd kept locked away all day. The hurt, the exhaustion, the bone-deep weariness of having to prove his humanity. And then, because morning would come whether he was ready or not, he locked it away again and began preparing for the battle ahead. David didn't sleep that night. He told himself he would stretched out on the leather sofa in his office around midnight, but his mind wouldn't stop. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Rebecca's face. That look, that immediate assessment, that decision made in the space of a heartbeat that he wasn't worth basic human respect. At 4:37 a.m., he gave up pretending and made coffee in the small kitchenette. The city was still dark outside, but he could see the earliest delivery trucks making their rounds. The street cleaners, the handful of people whose New York existed in these quiet hours before the rest of the world woke up. His phone had finally stopped buzzing around 2 a.m. Now it sat silent on his desk, a bomb waiting to explode again the moment business hours began. David knew what was coming. The board would want crisis management. The lawyers would want carefully crafted statements. The PR team would want to control the narrative, minimize damage, protect the brand. But David had spent the hours between midnight and dawn doing something different. He'd been reading. Not legal briefs or PR strategies, but the things that had been buried in company files for years. Every discrimination complaint filed by a guest. Every incident report that mentioned race. Every exit interview where an employee of color mentioned feeling uncomfortable, unwelcome, or unsafe. There were hundreds of them. Rebecca Miller wasn't an anomaly. She was a symptom. At 6:15 a.m., Michael arrived with breakfast neither of them would eat, and news that the video had now been viewed over 15 million times. The hashtag had evolved. Now it wasn't just #GrandViewGate. It was #Dignity is not negotiable, using David's own words from the company mission statement. "The board wants an emergency meeting," Michael said, setting down 2 cups of coffee. 9 a.m. "Cancel it," David said. "David, I can't just—" "Yes, you can. Tell them I'll meet with them after I've handled what needs to be handled here. This is my company, Michael. I built it. And I'm going to fix it my way." Michael started to argue, saw something in David's face, and simply nodded. At 6:30 a.m., the first employees began arriving for the emergency staff meeting David had called. They filtered into the grand ballroom, a space usually reserved for weddings and galas, in small clusters, whispering, checking their phones, stealing glances at the stage where a single podium stood under harsh work lights. David watched them from the wings. He recognized most of the faces. Some he'd interviewed personally. Others he knew from performance reviews, from hallway conversations, from the thousand small interactions that made up a company. They looked nervous, scared. Some looked defiant. A few looked ashamed. By 7 a.m., every staff member from the previous day's shift was present. Rebecca wasn't there. She'd been escorted from the building last night. But Janet was sitting in the back row, her face puffy from crying. Steve stood near the exit arms, crossed, jaw tight. The rest of the front desk team clustered together. Housekeeping staff in their uniforms. Kitchen workers still smelling of morning prep. Concierge, bellhops, managers. Richard stood beside David backstage. "Are you sure about this?" he asked quietly. "I've never been more sure of anything," David replied. At 7:02 a.m., David walked onto the stage. The ballroom fell silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the carpet. 300 faces turned toward him, and David felt the weight of every single gaze. He stood at the podium for a long moment saying nothing, just looking at them, his employees, his responsibility, his failure. "Good morning," he said finally. His voice carried across the room without a microphone. The acoustics in this ballroom were excellent. He'd tested them himself during the renovation. "I'm David Thompson. Some of you know me, most of you don't. For those who don't, I'm the CEO and founder of Grand View Hotels and Resorts. I own this building. I sign your paychecks. And yesterday, several of you treated me like a criminal." The silence somehow deepened. "I want to tell you a story," David continued. "When I was 12 years old, my grandmother took me to a hotel in downtown Chicago. Not to stay there, we couldn't afford that. But she'd been cleaning rooms there for 23 years, and they were having an employee appreciation lunch. She wanted to show me where she worked. We walked through the lobby. It was beautiful, all marble and gold, and before we even reached the restaurant where the lunch was being held, a manager stopped us. Asked my grandmother if she was lost. Told her the staff entrance was around back. She had to show her employee ID 3 times before he believed she worked there. Do you know what that taught me? No one answered. It taught me that luxury and dignity don't always exist in the same space. It taught me that you can build something beautiful and still have it be ugly underneath. And it taught me that if I ever had the chance, I would build something different. Something better. A place where everyone was treated with respect, regardless of what they looked like or what they wore. David paused, looking out at the faces. He found Janet in the back row. "I built this company on 3 principles. Excellence has no color. Hospitality knows no boundaries. Dignity is not negotiable. These aren't just words. They're not corporate slogans. They're promises. And yesterday we broke every single one of them." He could see people shifting uncomfortably. Someone coughed. Someone else whispered something. "Yesterday," David said, his voice harder now, "a man walked into this lobby with a backpack and a hoodie and tried to check in. And your colleagues, people you work beside every day, decided in an instant that he didn't belong. They questioned his reservation. They told him to go to a cheaper hotel. They called him a liar. They threatened to have him arrested. And one of them sprayed hand sanitizer in front of his face to make it clear how contaminated she thought he was." The room was utterly still now. "That man was me," David said. "But it could have been anyone. It could have been the doctor who just finished a 30-hour shift and wanted a comfortable place to sleep. It could have been the tech entrepreneur who sold his company and decided to celebrate. It could have been the father bringing his kids to New York for the first time. It could have been any black person who walked through those doors and dared to believe they would be treated like a human being." He saw tears on several faces now, saw others staring at their hands, saw Steve near the exit, his face red, his jaw working. "I need you to understand something," David continued. "This isn't just about what happened to me. This is about what happens every day in hotels across this country, across the world. This is about the cumulative weight of 1,000 small judgments, 1,000 automatic assumptions, 1,000 moments where someone decides you don't belong based on the color of your skin." He pulled out his phone, held it up. 15 million people have watched the video of what happened yesterday. 15 million. They've seen the way I was treated in my own hotel. And do you know what most of the comments say? They say, "This happens to me all the time." They say, "I've stopped trying to stay in nice hotels because I'm tired of being treated like I'm stealing something." They say, "Thank you for showing the world what we deal with every day." David set his phone down. "So here's what's going to happen. Rebecca Miller has been terminated. She will not be returning to this company in any capacity." A collective gasp ran through the room. "Steve Wilson has been suspended pending a full investigation. Depending on what that investigation reveals, he may also be terminated." Steve pushed off the wall. This is bullshit, he said, his voice carrying across the ballroom. I was doing my job. She called me to remove someone who was what, Steve? David's voice cut through the room like a blade. Someone who was black. Someone who didn't look like your idea of a luxury guest. Someone who dared to exist in this space. Someone who was trespassing, Steve shot back. Someone who refused to leave when told. That's my job, to protect this property and our guests. Our guests, David repeated. And who decides who's a guest, Steve? Because from where I'm standing, you decided I wasn't a guest the moment you saw me. You decided I was a problem to be solved. You decided I was a threat. You made that decision in seconds based on nothing but the color of my skin. I didn't know who you were, Steve protested. Exactly, David's voice boomed through the ballroom. You didn't know who I was. You didn't ask. You didn't check. You didn't give me the benefit of the doubt. You just assumed. And that's the problem, Steve. Because every black person who walks through those doors deserves the same respect you would give me if you knew I was the CEO. Every black person deserves to be treated like a human being who belongs, not a criminal who needs to be removed. Steve's face was purple now. So I'm supposed to just let anyone walk around the lobby? I'm supposed to ignore suspicious behavior? What was suspicious about my behavior? David asked quietly. I walked through the front door. I approached the desk. I tried to check in. What about any of that was suspicious? Steve opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. You had a backpack. So do half the guests who check in here every day, David replied. Try again. You were dressed casually. So are the tech executives who come here straight from the airport. So are the families on vacation. So are the students visiting for college tours. Try again, Steve. Tell everyone in this room what was really suspicious about me. The silence was excruciating. Say it, David pressed. Say what you're thinking. Say what you saw when you looked at me. Steve's hands were shaking. I saw someone who looked out of place. Out of place in what way? You know what way? Steve said, his voice breaking. I do know, David said. But I need everyone else in this room to know too. I need them to hear it said out loud. I need them to understand what we're really talking about here. Steve turned and walked out of the ballroom. The door slammed behind him. David watched him go, then turned back to the remaining staff. Janet Park, he said. Stand up, please. Janet rose on shaky legs. She looked like she might be sick. Janet, you've been with this company for 6 years. You're a good employee. You're reliable, professional, and kind to your coworkers, which is why what you did yesterday was so disappointing. Janet's voice was barely a whisper. Mr. Thompson, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean... You didn't mean what? David interrupted gently. You didn't mean to tell me to go to a different hotel. You didn't mean to suggest I couldn't afford to be here. You didn't mean to stand there while Rebecca humiliated me and do nothing to stop it. Tears were streaming down Janet's face now. I was scared. Rebecca is my supervisor. I didn't want to contradict her. I didn't want to lose my job. So you were willing to let me lose my dignity instead? Janet crumpled. Her sobs echoed through the silent ballroom. Someone in her row reached over to touch her arm. Janet, David said, and his voice was softer now. I'm not firing you, but I am demoting you. You're going back to front desk associate, and you're going to spend the next 6 months learning how to stand up for what's right even when it's hard, even when it's scary, even when it might cost you something, because that's what working at this company means. It means defending our values, not just when it's convenient, but especially when it's not. Janet nodded, still crying. David looked out at the rest of the staff. I know some of you are thinking this is harsh. I know some of you feel bad for Rebecca, for Steve, for Janet. And I understand that. They're your colleagues, maybe your friends. But I need you to feel something else too. I need you to feel what it's like to walk into a beautiful building and immediately be treated like you're garbage. I need you to feel what it's like to have your word questioned, your reservation doubted, your very existence in a space challenged. I need you to understand that while you're feeling sorry for people who lost their jobs, there are black people, brown people, people of color across this country who have been losing their dignity in hotels like this for decades. He paused, letting that sink in. Starting Monday, every single person in this company will undergo mandatory anti-bias training. Real training, not a 2-hour video you can fast forward through. We're bringing in experts. You're going to learn about implicit bias, about microaggressions, about the history of discrimination in the hospitality industry. And you're going to learn how to recognize it in yourselves and in each other. Murmurs ran through the crowd. Not all of them sounded happy. I know some of you are rolling your eyes right now, David said. I know some of you are thinking, I'm not racist. Why do I have to do this? But here's the thing. Racism isn't always cross-burnings and slurs. Sometimes it's a raised eyebrow, a subtle question, an assumption, a moment where you decide someone doesn't belong. And if we're going to change this industry, we have to be willing to look at those moments honestly. He pulled out a piece of paper, unfolded it. I have here a list of every discrimination complaint filed at this property in the last 3 years. There are 47 of them. 47 guests who felt unwelcome, disrespected, or discriminated against. And do you know how many of those complaints resulted in real consequences for the staff involved? 0. Not one. They were all filed away, labeled as misunderstandings or personality conflicts or he said, she said situations. The room was silent again. That ends today, David said. We're implementing a new system where every complaint is investigated by an independent third party. Every complaint is documented. Every pattern is identified. And every staff member who repeatedly makes guests feel unwelcome will be retrained or removed. He folded the paper, set it down. I know this is uncomfortable. I know change is hard. But I also know that we can be better than we are. I know we can build something that actually lives up to the promises we make. And I know that if we don't do this now, if we don't seize this moment and transform ourselves, then we don't deserve to exist as a company. David looked around the ballroom one more time. You have a choice to make. You can be part of this change or you can leave. But if you stay, you're committing to treating every single person who walks through those doors with dignity and respect. You're committing to examining your own biases. You're committing to being better. Can you do that? Slowly, heads began to nod, some enthusiastically, some reluctantly, but they nodded. Good, David said. Then let's get to work. The meeting ended at 8:17 a.m. Staff filed out in silence, many of them looking shell-shocked. David stood on the stage watching them go and felt the weight of what he'd just set in motion. Richard approached, his face grave. The board is calling again. They're not happy you canceled the meeting. They can be unhappy, David said. I have something more important to do. At 10 a.m., David stood in the lobby where it had all happened. The morning light streamed through the windows, turning the marble floors golden. A cleaning crew had just finished and everything gleamed. Perfect. Pristine. Unmarked by the ugliness that had occurred here 20 hours ago. Michael had set up a simple podium near the spot where David had been told to leave. Behind him, the brass fixtures caught the light. Around him, a small crowd had gathered, media invited by Michael, guests who'd heard what was happening, staff members watching from the edges. And on multiple tripods, cameras were recording. This would be live-streamed. This would be seen. David stepped to the podium and looked directly into the cameras. My name is David Thompson, he began. I'm the founder and CEO of Grandview Hotels and Resorts, and yesterday I was kicked out of my own hotel because I'm black. He paused, letting that land. I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you this because what happened to me happens to people every single day. In hotels, in restaurants, in stores, in schools, in hospitals, everywhere. And most of the time nobody films it, nobody sees it, Nobody believes it. But this time, 8,000 people watched it happen live. 15 million have watched it since. And now you know it's not a myth. It's not an exaggeration. It's not people being too sensitive. It's real. A reporter in the front row was scribbling frantically. The cameras remained fixed on David's face. I could tell you that this was an isolated incident, that these were just a few bad employees, that this doesn't represent my company. But that would be a lie. This is systemic. This is cultural. This is the result of years of not paying attention, not asking hard questions, not demanding better from ourselves and each other. His voice strengthened. So here's what we're going to do. Grandview Hotels and Resorts is committing to becoming the industry leader in anti-discrimination practices. Every employee, every single one from housekeeping to executive level, will undergo comprehensive anti-bias training. We're implementing an independent complaint system where guests can report discrimination without fear that it will be buried. We're auditing every one of our properties for patterns of discriminatory behavior, and we're adopting a zero-tolerance policy. If you make guests feel unwelcome because of their race, their religion, their appearance, you don't belong at this company. He could see people in the crowd nodding. Some of the staff members looked nervous. Good, they should be. But more than that, we're changing how we define hospitality. Because hospitality isn't just about thread counts and marble lobbies and crystal chandeliers. Real hospitality is about seeing every person who walks through your doors as worthy of respect. It's about treating everyone with dignity. It's about building a space where everyone feels welcome. David's voice dropped, became more intimate, more personal. My grandmother cleaned hotel rooms for 40 years. She made beds and scrubbed toilets and polished fixtures so that guests could have a beautiful experience. And she was invisible. People walked past her like she wasn't there. They left messes for her to clean up. They looked through her, around her, never at her. And you know what she told me once? She said, "David, I don't need them to see me. I just need them to see what I make possible." His throat tightened. But she deserved to be seen. She deserved to be valued. She deserved to walk through the front door of those hotels as a guest and be treated with the same respect she showed every single day. She never got that, but I'm going to make damn sure that her grandchildren do, that everyone's grandchildren do. The lobby was completely silent, except for David's voice. Excellence has no color, he said. Hospitality knows no boundaries. Dignity is not negotiable. These aren't just words anymore. They're our commitment. And if we fail to live up to them, I want the world to hold us accountable. He looked directly into the camera. To everyone who has ever been made to feel like you don't belong in a space you paid to be in a space you have every right to occupy, I see you. To everyone who has ever been followed in a store, questioned in a lobby, treated like a criminal for existing while black, while brown, while different, I see you. And I promise you, we're going to do better. Not just at Grandview, across this entire industry. Because this is bigger than one hotel. This is about changing what hospitality means. He stepped back from the podium. Thank you. The lobby erupted. Questions shouted from reporters. Cameras flashing. People on their phones already sharing, already spreading the word. David walked through the chaos toward the elevators, Michael beside him. That was powerful, Michael said quietly. It was necessary, David replied. By noon, the video had 3 million views. By 3 p.m., it was trending on every social platform. By 6 p.m., major news networks were covering it. By 8 p.m., David's phone was flooded with messages from civil rights leaders, from business executives, from hospitality industry, peers, from strangers around the world. But the message that stopped him came at 9:23 p.m. It was from an email address he didn't recognize, with a subject line that read, "Thank you for your courage." David opened it. Mr. Thompson, my name is Marcus Williams. I'm 17 years old. Last year, my dad took me to a nice hotel for my birthday. First time we'd ever stayed somewhere like that. The staff treated us like we were criminals, followed us to our room, Called security because someone said we looked suspicious in the pool area. We left after one night. It was the most humiliating experience of my life, and I've never told anyone about it because I was ashamed. I thought somehow it was our fault. But watching your video, hearing you talk about dignity, I realized it wasn't. Thank you for standing up. Thank you for not walking away. Because of you, I'm not ashamed anymore. Because of you, I know I belong. I'm going to study hospitality management in college. And someday, I'm going to work for a company like yours. A company that sees people like me. David read the email 3 times. Then he saved it, printed it, and pinned it to the wall of his office. This was why. This was what mattered. Not the views or the headlines or the board meetings. This kid. This one kid who now believed he belonged. That night, David finally slept. Not in his office, but in a guest room on the 20th floor. He wanted to experience the hotel the way a guest would. He wanted to see what they saw, feel what they felt. The room was beautiful. Everything he'd designed it to be. But lying there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, David thought about all the guests who'd stayed in rooms like this and felt their presence being questioned, their dignity being challenged, their humanity being denied. No more. Starting tomorrow, the real work began. The real work began at 6 a.m. when David woke to the sound of his phone buzzing with an urgency that suggested the world hadn't stopped caring overnight. He lay in the hotel bed for a moment, disoriented by the unfamiliar ceiling, before remembering his decision to stay as a guest would. The sheets were Egyptian cotton, exactly as specified. The room temperature was perfect. Everything was designed for comfort. But comfort, David had learned, was the easiest part of hospitality. Dignity was harder. By the time he reached his office at 6:45, Michael was already there with coffee and a tablet full of data that made David's stomach tighten. Overnight, the story had exploded beyond social media. The Washington Post had run a front-page piece titled, "When the Boss Goes Undercover and Discovers His Company's Ugly Truth." The New York Times business section led with, "Billionaire CEO Confronts Racial Bias in Luxury Hospitality." CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, they were all covering it. But more importantly, they were asking the question David had hoped they would ask. If this happens at a 5-star hotel to a billionaire CEO, what happens everywhere else to everyone else? The stock dropped 3% at opening yesterday, Michael said, setting down his tablet. But it recovered by close and opened up 2% this morning. Investors are calling your speech transformative. They're saying you turned a crisis into a movement. I don't care about the stock, David said, though he knew that wasn't entirely true. He cared because the stock meant jobs, meant the ability to make the changes he wanted to make. But it couldn't be the priority. What about the properties? What are we hearing from the other hotels? Michael pulled up a spreadsheet. Mixed reactions. Some general managers are all in already scheduling training sessions and reviewing their incident reports. Others are resistant. Tampa sent a memo saying their property doesn't have these issues. Phoenix wants to know if the new policies will affect their bottom line. And Dallas. Let me guess, David interrupted. Thomas thinks I'm overreacting. His exact words were, "David's letting one bad incident dictate policy for an entire company," Michael confirmed. David felt anger flash through him, hot and immediate. One bad incident. As if 23 minutes of public humiliation could be reduced to those 3 words. As if the 47 discrimination complaints in 3 years at just the Manhattan property were irrelevant. As if centuries of black people being told they didn't belong in certain spaces could be dismissed as an overreaction. Set up individual calls with every resistant manager, David said quietly. Starting with Thomas, today. The first call happened at 9 a.m. Thomas Wright appeared on screen from his Dallas office, looking confident in a way that set David's teeth on edge. Thomas was 53, a hospitality veteran with 30 years of experience, and he clearly thought he knew better than his CEO about how to run a hotel. "David, Thomas began, his tone carefully calibrated to sound reasonable. I understand you're upset about what happened in New York. Hell, we all are. It was unprofessional and unacceptable. But implementing company-wide policy changes based on one incident seems... Stop, David said. Right there. This isn't about one incident, Thomas. It's about a pattern we've been ignoring. Tell me, how many discrimination complaints has your property received in the last year? Thomas shifted uncomfortably. Well, I'd have to check the exact 11, David said, pulling up the data on his own screen. 11 complaints, all from guests of color, all describing similar experiences, questioned reservations, followed by security, treated with suspicion. And do you know how many of those complaints you personally investigated? The silence stretched. That's what I thought, David continued. So when you tell me your property doesn't have these issues, what you really mean is that you haven't been paying attention to the issues you do have. David, with all due respect, Thomas, let me ask you something. Have you ever walked into one of our hotels and been immediately questioned about whether you belong there? No, but I don't see. Have you ever had a staff member spray sanitizer after touching something you touched? Have you ever been told to try a cheaper hotel? Have you ever been threatened with arrest for trying to check into a reservation you paid for? Thomas's jaw tightened. No. Then with all due respect, David said, his voice cold, you don't get to tell me I'm overreacting. You don't get to minimize what happened. And you don't get to decide that your property is immune from the disease that infected my flagship hotel. Every property participates in the new training. Every property implements the new policies. No exceptions. Are we clear? Thomas stared at him for a long moment. David could see the calculation happening behind his eyes push back or fall in line. Crystal clear, Thomas finally said. The call ended. Michael, who'd been listening from across the room, let out a low whistle. That was intense. It's going to get more intense, David replied. Get Tampa on the line next. But before the Tampa call could happen, David's assistant knocked on the door. Sir, you have visitors. They say it's urgent. Two people entered the office, and David recognized them immediately, even though they'd never met. Congresswoman Linda Martinez from California and Senator James Okonkwo from Illinois, both members of the Congressional Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation, both black. Mr. Thompson, Senator Okonkwo said, extending his hand. Thank you for seeing us without an appointment. David shook both their hands, gestured to chairs. Of course. What can I do for you? Congresswoman Martinez didn't waste time. We want to hold hearings on discrimination in the hospitality industry. Your video has opened a door, Mr. Thompson. People are paying attention. We have an opportunity to examine this systemically, to look at practices across hotels, airlines, restaurants, the entire sector, and we'd like you to testify. David felt something shift in his chest. This was bigger than he'd imagined. Bigger than his company, bigger than one viral video. This was the moment he'd hoped for and feared in equal measure. What would you need from me? He asked. The truth? Senator Okonkwo said simply. Your story, your data, your willingness to say publicly what most companies won't admit privately, that racial bias in hospitality is real, it's pervasive, and it's costing us our humanity. David looked at Michael, who gave a slight nod, then back at the two legislators. When? David asked. 2 weeks, Congresswoman Martinez said. We're fast-tracking this. The public attention is high right now. We need to act while people are still watching. I'll be there, David said. After they left, Michael closed the door and leaned against it. Do you realize what you just agreed to? You're going to testify before Congress? Every word you say will be national news. Every hotel chain in America will be watching. You're going to make enemies, David. I already have enemies, David replied. Yesterday I learned that some of them work for me. The rest of the day was a blur of calls, meetings, and decisions that would reshape the entire company. David spoke with hotel managers in San Francisco and Seattle, in Atlanta and Chicago, in London and Dubai. Some were enthusiastic about the changes. Some were grudgingly compliant. A few were openly hostile, and David made notes about which ones would need closer supervision or eventual replacement. At 3 p.m., he finally had the board meeting he'd been avoiding. 6 faces on screen, all of them wealthy, all of them white, all of them looking concerned about the direction their CEO was taking. "David," the board chair began. His name was Preston Whitmore III, old money from Connecticut, a man who'd never been questioned in a lobby in his life. "We appreciate your passion about this issue, but we're concerned about the financial implications of the sweeping changes you're proposing. Mandatory training for thousands of employees, new reporting systems, independent investigators. This is going to cost millions." "Billions," David corrected. "Over the next 5 years, we're probably looking at $1 billion investment in making our company actually live up to its values." The board members exchanged glances. One of them, a venture capitalist named Sarah Chen, spoke up. "David, our responsibility is to the shareholders. How do we justify that kind of expense?" David had known this question was coming. He'd prepared for it. "Let me show you something," he said, pulling up a presentation. "This is our brand value analysis from last quarter. We were valued at $3 billion. Want to know what we're valued at today, 3 days after the video went viral?" He clicked to the next slide. $2.7 billion. We gained $400 million in brand value because people believe we're serious about change. They believe we're going to be different, better. And you know what happens if we fail to deliver on that promise? We don't just lose the $400 million, we lose everything. Because in 2025, consumers have choices. They can stay anywhere. And they're choosing to stay with companies that share their values. Another board member, an older man named Robert Sinclair, frowned. "But surely you're not suggesting we make business decisions based on social media sentiment?" "I'm suggesting we make business decisions based on being decent human beings," David replied. "But if you need a business case, here it is. The black travel market alone is worth $109 billion annually. The broader diverse travel market is worth over $300 billion. Right now, a significant portion of that market avoids luxury hotels because they're tired of being treated like criminals. If we can capture even 10% of that market by being the company that actually treats everyone with dignity, we're looking at $30 billion in potential revenue. So yes, Preston, this is good for shareholders. But more importantly, it's good for our souls." The screen was silent for a moment. Then Sarah Chen smiled. "When you put it that way, it seems like the riskier choice would be to not make these changes." "Exactly," David said. Preston cleared his throat. "All right, you have the board's support. But David, will be watching the numbers closely. If this starts to impact profitability..." "It won't," David interrupted. "Because we're not just changing policies, we're changing culture. And culture is what separates a good company from a great one." After the board meeting ended, David allowed himself 30 seconds to feel the victory. Then he got back to work. Over the next week, the transformation accelerated. David brought in Dr. Angela Morrison, a renowned expert on unconscious bias, who'd worked with tech companies and universities to design the training program. It wouldn't be a simple online course or a one-time seminar. It would be comprehensive, ongoing, and mandatory at every level. "I want you to make people uncomfortable," David told her during their first meeting. "I want them to examine their assumptions. I want them to see their blind spots. Can you do that?" Dr. Morrison smiled. "Mr. Thompson, making people uncomfortable is my specialty." The anonymous reporting system was designed by a team of engineers and human rights advocates. Guests could report discrimination through the hotel app, through the website, or through a dedicated hotline. Every report would be reviewed by independent investigators. Not hotel staff, not company employees, but outside experts with no stake in protecting the brand. We're creating accountability, Michael explained to the general managers in a company-wide video call. Real accountability. If patterns emerge at your property, you will answer for them. Not to David, not to corporate, to the guests who've been harmed. Some managers looked terrified. Good, David thought. They should be. The AI monitoring system was perhaps the most controversial change. Cameras in the lobbies, which already existed for security, would now be monitored by artificial intelligence programmed to flag potential discriminatory interactions. Long wait times for guests of color. Different questioning patterns. Security being called disproportionately. The AI would catch it all. "This is Big Brother," one manager complained during a Q&A session. "No," David responded. "Big Brother watches everyone. We're watching you because you're our employees and you're representing our values. If you're treating every guest with respect, you have nothing to worry about. If you're not, the AI will help us identify and correct the problem before it becomes a lawsuit or a viral video." 10 days after the incident in the lobby, David stood in that same lobby at 9 a.m. for what had been advertised as a major announcement. This time the crowd was different. Media packed the space, not just local news but national networks, international outlets, bloggers, podcasters, everyone with a camera and a platform. Hotel guests watched from the upper balconies. Staff stood in their designated positions, perfectly uniformed, perfectly attentive. And on social media, over 10,000 people were watching the live stream. David approached the podium that had been set up near the brass mailbox. He looked out at the sea of faces and cameras and thought about how much had changed in 10 days. How much more needed to change. "Good morning," he began. 10 days ago, I stood in this lobby and was told I didn't belong here. Today, I'm standing in this lobby to tell you what we've done about it and what we're going to continue doing." He could feel the attention sharp and focused. In the past 10 days, Grandview Hotels and Resorts has implemented the most comprehensive anti-discrimination program in the hospitality industry. Every one of our 23 properties across 4 continents is now participating in mandatory bias training designed by leading experts. We've launched an anonymous reporting system that allows guests to report discrimination without fear of retaliation. We've hired independent investigators to examine every complaint and identify patterns. And we've implemented AI monitoring in our lobbies to help us identify and address discriminatory behavior before it escalates. Cameras flashed. Reporters scribbled notes. "But we're not stopping there," David continued. "Today I'm announcing 3 additional initiatives. First, we're partnering with historically Black colleges and universities to create a scholarship and internship program that will bring diverse talent into luxury hospitality. We're investing $50 million over the next 5 years to ensure that the next generation of hotel managers, executives, and leaders reflects the diversity of our guests." He could see some of the staff members smiling now. Good. Second, we're launching a supplier diversity program. We're committing that 30% of our contracts for supplies, services, and construction will go to minority-owned businesses within 3 years, because equality isn't just about how we treat guests. It's about how we distribute economic opportunity. More flashes, more notes. David could feel the story growing, expanding, becoming something bigger than he'd imagined. And third, we're establishing an industry-wide coalition to address discrimination in hospitality. We're inviting every major hotel chain, every airline, every restaurant group to join us in setting new standards. Because this isn't about Grandview being better than our competitors. This is about our entire industry being better than our past. The lobby erupted in applause. Not from everyone. Some of the older staff members stood with arms crossed, faces skeptical, but from enough people to make the sound swell and echo off the marble and brass. "I know some people think we're doing too much," David said when the applause died down. "I know some people think we're overreacting to one incident. But let me be clear, we're not reacting to one incident. We're responding to decades of discrimination that has made countless people feel unwelcome in spaces they had every right to occupy. We're responding to the reality that in 2025, a black person can still be treated like a criminal for the crime of existing in a nice hotel. His voice grew stronger. Excellence has no color. Hospitality knows no boundaries. Dignity is not negotiable. These words are carved into the wall of our corporate headquarters. They're printed on our mission statements. They're supposed to define who we are. And for too long, they were just pretty words. Starting now, they're our reality. Starting now, anyone who can't live up to these standards doesn't belong at Grandview Hotels. I don't care how long you've been here. I don't care how good your performance reviews are. If you can't treat every guest with dignity, you're out. The silence in the lobby was profound. Some of you have asked me why I'm pushing so hard. David said, his voice softer now. Why I'm investing so much money, so much time, so much energy into this issue. Let me tell you why. He paused, gathering himself. My grandmother, Rosa Thompson, cleaned hotel rooms for 40 years. She made minimum wage. She had no benefits. She worked holidays and weekends. She scrubbed toilets and changed sheets and made sure every guest had a perfect experience. And she was invisible. People walked past her without seeing her. They treated her like furniture. And when she died, the hotel she'd worked at for 23 years didn't send flowers to her funeral. David's throat tightened, but he pushed through. I built this company for her, so that people like her, people who work hard and deserve respect, would finally be seen, would finally be valued. But I failed. Because while I was building beautiful hotels with marble lobbies and crystal chandeliers, I forgot to build something more important, a culture where everyone is treated with humanity. Tears on several faces now. Even some of the skeptical staff members looked moved. So that's why I'm doing this, David said. Not because it's profitable, though it is. Not because it's good PR, though. That's a nice bonus. I'm doing this because my grandmother deserved better. Because every person who walks through these doors deserves better. Because we can build something beautiful on the outside that's also beautiful on the inside. He stepped back from the podium. Thank you for listening. Thank you for changing. And thank you for believing that we can be better than we were. The applause this time was thunderous. It rolled through the lobby like a wave, echoing off every hard surface, filling every corner. David walked through it toward the elevators, and as he passed staff members, several of them reached out to shake his hand, to touch his arm, to say quietly, thank you. Upstairs in his office, watching the live stream numbers climb past 50,000 views, David allowed himself to feel what he'd been holding back for 10 days. Not triumph, not vindication, just a deep, bone-weary relief that maybe, just maybe, something good was coming from something so painful. His phone buzzed with a text from his sister Carol. Grandma Rosa would be proud. I'm proud. You're changing the world, baby brother. Another text, this one from Jessica, the woman who'd live-streamed the original incident. 10,000 people watched your speech live. The comments are incredible. People are crying. People are saying they're going to apply for jobs at your company. You're not just changing your hotels, Mr. Thompson. You're changing what people believe is possible. And then an email from Marcus Williams, the 17-year-old who wanted to study hospitality. I showed your speech to my high school, to my whole class. My teacher cried. We're going to use it in our social justice unit. Thank you for showing us what leadership looks like. David read that email 3 times. Then he printed it and pinned it next to the first one. That evening, as the sun set over Manhattan and turned the city gold, David stood at his window and watched people enter and exit his hotel. Guests of every color, every background, every economic level. And for the first time in his life, he believed, truly believed, that they would all be treated the same way. Not because he'd demanded it, not because he'd threatened it, but because he'd created a system, a culture, a reality where discrimination had consequences and dignity was non-negotiable. The phone rang. Michael. You need to see this, Michael said, sounding breathless. See what? The stock. It's up 18%, but more than that. Reservations are up 32% across all properties. People are booking rooms just to support us, just to be part of what we're building. David closed his eyes. The numbers mattered. They meant he could keep making changes. They meant he could expand the programs. They meant the board would stay off his back. But more importantly, they meant people believed him. They believed change was possible. "There's something else," Michael added. "Marriott just announced they're launching their own anti-discrimination initiative. So did Hilton and Hyatt. They're all following your lead, David. You're changing the industry." David opened his eyes, looked out at the city lights beginning to sparkle in the gathering darkness. "Good," he said quietly. "Because one company changing isn't enough. We need all of them to change. We need everywhere to change." After he hung up, David remained at the window for a long time. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The congressional hearing in a week would be difficult. There would be more resistance, more pushback, more people who thought he was doing too much or moving too fast. But tonight, standing in his office looking out at his hotel and his city, David Thompson allowed himself to believe that his grandmother's dream, the dream of a world where everyone was treated with dignity, might actually be possible. And he promised her memory, that he wouldn't stop until it was real. The night before the congressional hearing, David couldn't sleep again. But this time, it wasn't from anger or pain. It was from something closer to fear. In 12 hours, he would sit before the Senate Commerce Committee and tell his story to the world. Every word would be scrutinized, every pause analyzed. The hospitality industry would be watching, waiting to see if he would back down, soften his message, or protect his competitors. He wouldn't. At 5 a.m., he gave up on sleep and went for a run through Manhattan's streets, still dark and quiet. His feet hit the pavement in a steady rhythm, and he thought about all the miles he'd traveled to get here. Not just physical miles, but the distance between the 12-year-old boy watching his grandmother be dismissed in a hotel lobby and the 47-year-old CEO who was about to testify before Congress about why that should never happen again. By 7 a.m., he was showered, dressed in a navy suit his sister had picked out because she said it made him look serious but not unapproachable, and sitting in the back of a car heading to Capitol Hill. Michael sat beside him reviewing talking points David had already memorized. "Remember," Michael said, "Senator Okonkwo and Congresswoman Martinez are on our side, but there will be hostile questions. Senator Davies from Mississippi has already made statements about woke capitalism and manufacturing racial division. He's going to come at you hard." "Let him," David said, watching Washington, D.C. materialize outside his window. The Senate hearing room was exactly like every movie had depicted: high ceilings, wood paneling, senators seated at an elevated bench, cameras everywhere. The gallery was packed with journalists, advocates, hospitality executives in expensive suits who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else, and ordinary people who'd taken time off work to witness this moment. David saw Jessica in the third row, the woman who'd live-streamed his humiliation. She gave him a small nod. He nodded back. Senator Okonkwo called the hearing to order at 10 a.m. sharp. His voice carried authority and purpose. "We are here today to examine discrimination in the American hospitality industry. For too long, people of color have been made to feel unwelcome in hotels, restaurants, and other public accommodations. We are here because 2 weeks ago, a video went viral showing a black CEO being kicked out of his own hotel. But more importantly, we are here because that CEO, David Thompson, refused to let that moment be forgotten. Mr. Thompson, thank you for your courage in coming forward." David leaned toward the microphone. "Thank you for the opportunity to speak, Senator." "Mr. Thompson." Senator Okonkwo continued. "Can you describe for the committee what happened on September 27th in the lobby of your hotel?" David had told this story a dozen times now, in speeches and interviews and meetings. But telling it here under oath with the weight of congressional record behind it felt different, more permanent, more real. He told it all. Every detail. The sanitizer, the assumptions, the way Rebecca's voice had changed when she spoke to white guests versus when she spoke to him, the way Steve's hand had moved toward his belt, the way Janet had stood there and let it happen. When he finished, the room was silent, except for the clicking of camera shutters. Congresswoman Martinez spoke next. Mr. Thompson, in your written testimony, you state that this isn't an isolated incident. Can you elaborate? Yes, Congresswoman. David pulled out a folder thick with documents. In the past 3 years, just at our Manhattan property, we received 47 formal discrimination complaints. Across all our properties, that number is over 300. And those are just the formal complaints, the people who bothered to file paperwork. How many more just left angry, hurt, and silent? How many decided never to stay at a nice hotel again because they were tired of being treated like criminals? And what have you done in response to discovering this pattern? She asked. David outlined every change: the training, the reporting system, the AI monitoring, the scholarships, the supplier diversity program, the industry coalition. As he spoke, he could see some of the hospitality executives in the gallery shifting uncomfortably. Then Senator Davies took his turn. He was 68, white-haired, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Mr. Thompson, I appreciate your passion, but I have to ask, aren't you being a bit dramatic? You admit yourself that you were dressed casually, carrying a backpack, approached the desk without identifying yourself. Isn't it possible that this was simply a misunderstanding, that these employees were doing their jobs trying to protect the property, and you're now destroying their careers and implementing expensive, unnecessary programs because of one mistake? David had known this was coming. He took a breath, looked directly at Senator Davies. Senator, let me ask you a question. Have you ever walked into a hotel and been immediately treated with suspicion? Well, Have you ever had someone spray sanitizer after you approached them? Have you ever been told you couldn't afford to be somewhere before anyone asked your name? No, but... Then, with all due respect, Senator, you don't understand what we're talking about. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was racial profiling. And it happens every single day to people who don't have the luxury of revealing themselves as the CEO. They just have to swallow it, leave and carry that humiliation with them. Is that the America you want to defend? Senator Davies's face reddened. Mr. Thompson, I'm not defending discrimination. I'm questioning whether your response is proportional to what? David interrupted, his voice sharp now. To the systematic dehumanization of people based on their skin color. To the cumulative trauma of being told 1,000 times in 1,000 ways that you don't belong, Senator. If anything, my response isn't enough. Because I'm just one company. But there are thousands of hotels, tens of thousands of restaurants, millions of public accommodations where this happens every day. So, no, Senator. I don't think I'm being dramatic. I think I'm finally paying attention. The gallery erupted in applause. Senator Okonkwo had to gavel for order. The hearing lasted 4 hours. David answered every question, provided every document, told every uncomfortable truth. Other witnesses testified, civil rights advocates, hospitality workers of color who shared their own stories, academics who presented data on discrimination in public accommodations. By the time it ended, David was exhausted. But he was also certain that something had shifted. The conversation had changed. This wasn't just about his hotel anymore. This was about an entire industry being forced to look at itself. Outside the Senate building, journalists swarmed. David stood at a podium flanked by Senator Okonkwo and Congresswoman Martinez and answered questions until his voice was hoarse. Mr. Thompson, do you think other hotel chains will follow your example? I know they will, because their customers are demanding it, because their employees are demanding it, because the world is watching. What about the employees you fired? Do you have any regrets? I regret that we created a culture where they thought their behavior was acceptable. I regret that we didn't catch this sooner. But I don't regret holding people accountable for violating our values. What's next for Grandview Hotels? David smiled. We keep working. This isn't a destination. It's a journey, and we're just getting started. That night, the video of David's exchange with Senator Davies went viral. Not as viral as the original lobby video, nothing would ever top that, but viral enough. 2 million views in 6 hours, 10 million by morning, and the comments were overwhelming in their support. This is what leadership looks like. He didn't back down. Respect. Every CEO should watch this and take notes. I'm crying. This man is changing the world. The weeks after the congressional hearing blurred together in a frenzy of implementation and iteration. The training programs launched at every property, and David insisted on attending sessions at each hotel. He wanted to see it firsthand, wanted to hear the conversations, wanted to watch people grapple with their biases. Some sessions were transformative. At the Chicago property, a white housekeeper broke down crying as she realized how differently she'd treated black guests versus white guests over her 20-year career. "I never thought I was racist," she sobbed. "I voted for Obama. I have black friends. But watching this video, seeing these examples, I realize I've been making assumptions my whole life." Other sessions were contentious. At the Phoenix property, several managers pushed back hard, insisting they didn't need training, that they already treated everyone equally. David showed up unannounced to that session and sat in the back row. When the resistance became too much, he stood up. "I'm David Thompson," he said, though they all knew who he was. "And I need this training as much as anyone. Because bias isn't about being a bad person. It's about being human. We all have unconscious prejudices. The question is whether we're brave enough to examine them. So let me ask you, are you brave enough?" The room went quiet. One by one, the resistant managers settled down and engaged. The anonymous reporting system revealed patterns David hadn't fully grasped. At the Miami property, black guests were waiting an average of 12 minutes longer for valet service than white guests. At the Los Angeles property, families of color were disproportionately assigned rooms near the elevator, the louder, less desirable rooms. At the London property, Middle Eastern guests were being subjected to additional security screening. Each pattern led to investigations, retraining, and in some cases, terminations. David didn't take pleasure in firing people, but he didn't hesitate either. The message had to be clear: this behavior would not be tolerated. The industry coalition started small, just 5 hotel chains willing to admit they had a problem. But it grew. Within 6 weeks, 12 major hospitality companies had joined. They shared best practices, compared data, held joint training sessions. Some joined because they genuinely wanted to change. Others joined because their customers were threatening boycotts if they didn't. David didn't care about their motivations. He cared about results. The HBCU scholarship program received over 3,000 applications in the first month. David personally reviewed the top 100 reading essays from young people who'd experienced discrimination, who'd watched the video, who'd decided that hospitality could be different if people like them entered the industry. He selected 50 scholars for the first year. 25 would receive full scholarships. 25 would get paid internships at Grand View properties. And all of them would be mentored by executives who looked like them, who understood their experiences, who could guide them. Marcus Williams, the 17-year-old who'd emailed David, was one of the 50. 3 months after the incident, David returned to the Manhattan flagship for the first time since he'd moved into the executive suite. He'd been traveling constantly, visiting properties, attending hearings, speaking at conferences. But he needed to see the place where it had all started. He walked through those revolving doors at 3 p.m. on a Friday, and everything looked the same. The marble, the chandeliers, the brass fixtures. But everything felt different. The front desk manager, a young black woman named Kendra Johnson, who'd been promoted from the Philadelphia property, looked up when he approached and smiled warmly. "Mr. Thompson, welcome back. It's good to see you." "It's good to be back, Kendra. How are things?" "Busy. Good busy. We're at 98% occupancy this week." She leaned in conspiratorially. "And we haven't had a single discrimination complaint in 63 days. That's a record." David felt something loosen in his chest. "That's excellent. Really excellent." He spent the next hour walking through the hotel. He watched the bellhops greet every guest with the same enthusiasm. He watched the concierge help a young Latino couple plan their anniversary dinner with genuine care. He watched security nod politely to a group of black teenagers checking in for a school trip without following them or questioning them. It wasn't perfect. Perfect was impossible. But it was better. Measurably, tangibly better. That evening, David sat in the lobby lounge, the same lounge where Jessica had recorded the live stream and just watched. He saw an elderly Asian couple check in smoothly. A Middle Eastern businessman get directed to his room without extra questions. A black family with 3 kids be greeted with warm smiles and offers to help with luggage. And then he saw something that made his breath catch. A young black man in a hoodie and jeans carrying a backpack walked through the revolving doors. He looked nervous. David recognized that nervousness, the bracing for judgment, the preparation for confrontation, the exhausting mental calculation of whether it was even worth trying. The young man approached the front desk. Kendra looked up and smiled. "Good evening. Welcome to the Grand View Grand. Are you checking in?" "Yes," the young man said cautiously. "Reservation under Williams," Kendra typed efficiently. "Perfect, I have you right here, Mr. Williams. You're in room 22847 with a city view. Is this your first time staying with us?" "Yes," he said, and David could hear the surprise in his voice. No questions about whether he'd really made the reservation. No suggestions to try a cheaper hotel. Just smooth professional service. "Wonderful," Kendra said. "Let me get you checked in. Can I see your ID and credit card, please?" The transaction took 3 minutes. Kendra explained the amenities offered to make dinner reservations, handed over key cards with a genuine smile. "Enjoy your stay, Mr. Williams. If you need anything at all, please don't hesitate to call the front desk." The young man walked toward the elevators looking dazed. David stood up and intercepted him. "Excuse me," David said. "I couldn't help but notice, is this your first time at a hotel like this?" The young man looked startled. "Yes, sir. My company's sending me to a conference, and they booked this place. I was I was nervous about coming here." "Why nervous?" The young man glanced around, lowered his voice. "I saw this video about what happened here a few months ago, and I've had bad experiences at nice hotels before, but my boss insisted I stay here, said things were different now." "Your boss was right," David said. "Things are different now, and I hope you have a wonderful stay." "Thank you," the young man said. "And hey, just so you know what that CEO did standing up like that, making these changes, it matters. It really matters. I wouldn't even be here if he hadn't done that. I would have made up an excuse and stayed somewhere cheaper, somewhere I wouldn't have to worry about being treated like I don't belong." David felt his throat tighten. "I'll be sure to pass that along to him." After the young man left, David sat back down in the lounge. He pulled out his phone and opened the video app. The original video, the one Jessica had live-streamed, now had 57 million views. 57 million people had watched him be humiliated. But they'd also watched him stand his ground, watched him demand better, watched him transform pain into purpose. The comments had evolved over the months. The initial outrage had been replaced by something deeper, more sustained. "I showed this video to my kids. I wanted them to understand what dignity looks like. I'm a hotel manager now because of this video. I'm going to be the change. 6 months ago, I avoided nice hotels. Today I checked into one and was treated with nothing but respect. Thank you for fighting." This should be required viewing in every business school in America. David scrolled through hundreds of comments, thousands, and he realized that what had started as the worst day of his professional life had become something much larger. It had become a catalyst, a turning point, a moment when enough people saw the truth clearly enough that they couldn't unsee it. His phone buzzed, a text from Michael. "You need to see the quarterly numbers. We're up 41% in revenue, profit margins up 18%. And customer satisfaction scores are the highest they've ever been. David, it's working. All of it is working." Another text, this one from Carol. "I just saw a news segment about you. They're calling you the most influential CEO in America, the most transformative leader in hospitality. But you know what I'm most proud of? You didn't change. You stayed you. You stayed the kid who held grandma's hand in hotel lobbies and promised her that someday things would be different. You kept that promise. David looked up from his phone and surveyed the lobby. The same lobby where he'd stood 6 months ago being told he didn't belong. The same marble floors. The same crystal chandeliers. But everything had changed. Not just the policies or the training or the systems. The soul of the place had changed. The culture had changed. The unspoken rules about who belonged and who didn't, those had been rewritten. Kevin, the young bellhop, who'd earnestly tried to remove David from this very spot 6 months ago, walked past carrying luggage for a black family. He caught David's eye and gave him a grateful nod. Kevin had not only kept his job, but had become one of the most vocal advocates for the new policies, often sharing his own mistakes and growth in training sessions. At 8 p.m., David went back up to his office. Tomorrow he had a meeting with Marriott's CEO, who wanted advice on implementing similar programs. Next week, he was speaking at the National Urban League's annual conference. The week after that, a TED Talk about leadership and courage. But tonight, he sat at his desk and responded to emails. Not from executives or board members or journalists. From ordinary people. From Marcus Williams, who'd started classes and wanted to share his excitement. From Jessica, who'd gotten a book deal to write about social justice and citizen journalism. From the young man he'd just met in the lobby, who'd found David's email and wanted to say thank you again. And from hundreds of others. Hotel workers who were implementing his programs at their properties. Travelers who felt safe staying in nice hotels for the first time. Parents who showed their kids the congressional hearing video and talked about courage and integrity. David answered every single email. It took him until midnight, but he answered them all. At 12:15 a.m., he finally allowed himself to leave the office. He took the elevator down to the lobby one more time. The night shift was on duty. Different faces. A quiet stillness that only existed in luxury hotels in the small hours of the morning. The night manager, a Latina woman named Sofia Rodriguez, was at the desk. She looked up when David approached. "Mr. Thompson, you're here late." "Couldn't sleep," David admitted. "Thought I'd take a walk through the hotel. Do you mind?" "Of course not. It's your hotel." She paused, then added, "You know I've worked in hospitality for 18 years, 5 different hotels, and this is the first place where I've never heard a colleague make a racist joke, where I've never seen a guest of color be treated differently, where the values on the wall actually mean something." David felt the weight of those words. "Thank you for telling me that, Sophia. No, thank you for caring enough to change things. A lot of CEOs would have fired a few people, issued a statement, and moved on. You actually did the work." After Sophia went back to her duties, David walked through the quiet lobby. He stopped at the exact spot where he'd stood 6 months ago, where Rebecca had sprayed sanitizer, where Steve had approached with his hand near his belt, where 40 people had watched him be dehumanized. He stood there for a long moment, remembering the anger, the hurt, the humiliation. But mostly he remembered the decision he'd made in that moment not to walk away, not to let it go. Not to accept that this was just how things were. His phone buzzed one more time. An unknown number, a text message. "Mr. Thompson, my name is Jennifer Chen. I'm a hotel management student at Cornell. I watched your video last year and it changed my life. I'd been thinking about switching majors because I'd experienced so much discrimination in my internships. I'm Chinese American, and people were always surprised I was in management, always assumed I was housekeeping. But your video made me realize the industry doesn't need fewer people like me. It needs more. So I stayed. And next month, I start my first job as an assistant manager at a Grandview property in Seattle. I'm going to carry forward what you started. I promise you that." David read the message 3 times. Then he typed back, "Jennifer, thank you for not giving up. Thank you for being brave. And thank you for reminding me why this matters. See you in Seattle." He looked up from his phone, looked at the lobby that had been the site of his greatest humiliation and had become the birthplace of his greatest purpose. The marble gleamed. The chandeliers sparkled. Everything was as beautiful as he'd designed it to be. But now it was beautiful on the inside, too. David walked to the revolving doors and stepped outside. The Manhattan night was cool, the streets still busy, even at this hour. He stood on the sidewalk where he'd stood 6 months ago, looking up at the building. His building, his company, his responsibility. A cab pulled up. A young black couple got out looking nervous and excited. The man held the woman's hand as they approached the doors. David held the door open for them. "Welcome to the Grand View Grand," he said with a smile. "Enjoy your stay." They thanked him, probably assuming he was a doorman, and walked into the lobby. David watched through the glass as Kendra greeted them with the same warmth she'd shown every guest that evening. And in that moment, standing on the sidewalk in the cool Manhattan night, David Thompson understood something profound. Power wasn't about owning buildings, or running companies, or having your name on a business card. Power was about using whatever influence you had to make sure the next person wouldn't have to fight the battles you fought. Power was about building something that would outlast you, outgrow you, become bigger than your own story. He thought about his grandmother, about the young man in the hoodie who'd checked in without incident, about Marcus Williams studying hospitality because he'd seen that change was possible, about Jennifer Chen refusing to give up on her dreams, about the millions of people who'd watched a video and decided that dignity was worth fighting for. This was the breakthrough. Not the viral video, or the congressional hearing, or the policy changes. The breakthrough was this moment, this ordinary Friday night, when a young couple could walk into a luxury hotel and just be treated like human beings who belonged. David pulled out his phone one last time and opened his notes app. He typed, "Leadership isn't about the title. It's not about the office or the salary or the recognition. Leadership is about seeing injustice and refusing to look away. It's about using your power to defend people who have less. It's about having the courage to act when everyone's watching and the integrity to keep acting when they're not. Real leadership costs something. It demands something. But the cost of not leading, the cost of silence, of complicity, of accepting that's just how things are, that cost is incalculable. Today we changed. Tomorrow we keep changing. And the day after that, and the day after that, until dignity is not negotiable, becomes more than words. Until it becomes who we are." He saved the note and put his phone away. Tomorrow, he would share those words at the TED Talk, but tonight, they were just for him. David Thompson stood on the sidewalk for one more moment, then turned and walked into his hotel. Not as the CEO making a grand entrance, not as the man who'd been kicked out and fired everyone, just as a man who'd learned that the hardest battles are the ones worth fighting, and that real change doesn't happen in viral moments. It happens in ordinary moments like these, when people are treated with respect, simply because they exist, simply because they're human, simply because dignity should never have been negotiable in the first place. The revolving doors spun behind him. The lobby embraced him. And somewhere, 57 million people carried his story forward into a world that was slowly, painfully, beautifully learning to be better.